My name is Patrick Kiernan, and this is my final portfolio for East Asian history. I decided to do a video for my portfolio, which this will be, and I decided that I was going to do my portfolio on images from wartime in Japan and China. I found my images in the Week 9 Jamboard, and also the Japan wartime and China wartime lectures from the class. So let's get right into it. So my first part will be on wartime in Japan, and we're going to be covering the Great Tokyo Air Raid. A little bit of backstory on the Great Tokyo Air Raid is it was executed on the nights of March 9th to March 10th, 1945. It was a pivotal event during World War II where American B-29 bombers systematically dropped bombs on Tokyo, attempting to get Tokyo and Japan to surrender in World War II after the Nazis had already surrendered. The raid was aimed at undermining Japan's war effort by targeting military and civilian infrastructures, which resulted in a very devastating toll for Japan as a country and Tokyo as a city. The estimated death toll was 80,000 to 130,000 civilians and military members, with countless others being injured, and there was widespread destruction of the city, leaving millions of people homeless. The Great Tokyo Air Raid is a very somber reminder of the human cost and profound consequences of warfare, and especially bombing warfare, where there's mass destruction involved. So now we're going to take a look at some of these pictures that depict the Great Tokyo Air Raid. Our first photo is going to be Watching Tokyo March 10th, 1945. It's by Kimisuke Ashimoto, and it is from the Week 9 Jamboard. This photo captures a devastating image of the Great Tokyo Air Raid that unfolded on March 10th, 1945, during World War II. It was a tragic event, and as you can see in this image, it was a horrible sight in Tokyo. This painting reflects the chaos and horror of that night, showing individuals who were eyewitnesses to one of the most horrible events that had been seen by the human eye. The fiery orange and the deep blacks on the canvas depict intense and widespread fires that the bombs caused to the city, and show the unreal destruction that was actually brought upon Japan. It engulfed the city completely and left millions homeless. You can see the lights and the sirens in the photo, showing that it was a complete massacre of the city. People didn't know what to do and just looked on with their children in disbelief. It shows the impact that it had on these civilians as they're watching their cities, their homes, and their friends get destroyed by bombs being dropped from the sky. It provides a very vivid glimpse into the actual destruction that occurred on the nights of March 9th to March 10th, and really shows the viewer how bad these bombings really were. What's actually very interesting about this image is that you can see the B-29 bomber to the left of the left light glaring into the sky. It's kind of caught up in the red fiery sky that the fires are depicting. But yeah, those are the bombers that dropped the bombs on Tokyo. They were American bombers, and they were known to be state-of-the-art technology at the time and had never been seen before. It kind of just adds to the eerie kind of vibe of this image, and just shows how devastating these bombings truly were to these people. We're going to move on to our next image now. So our second photo is called the Yumaya Bridge on the night of March 10th by Fukushima Yasusuke. I'm sorry if I got that name wrong. It is from our Japan wartime lecture and is also a depiction of the great Tokyo air raids. This image is from a different perspective. It's from Fukushima Yasusuke, who was 6 years old at the time of the attacks. It is from the day March 10th, 1945, which was the second day of the Great Tokyo Air Raids. This image is a little more, like you could say, explicit and gory than the last image because it shows many people burning and people truly being killed by these bombings. This image is very devastating. It characterizes the bombing very well and shows how devastating and deadly it truly was. The use of the colors yellow, orange, and red makes it just so much better and shows how bright these colors are, really show how destructive these flames and fires really were. And it kind of symbolizes the people themselves who are being just burned to death in a fiery, exciting mess. These bright and fiery colors truly show how vulnerable and innocent the victims were to these attacks. They weren't expecting it. This was out of nowhere for them. And they had no time to prepare for how devastating these 2 days would be. It was truly horrible, and this picture depicts it very, very well, as does the last one. The Yumaya Bridge was a very central focal point of this painting, and it serves as an important backdrop to the tragedy. All the victims are scattered around, and there's not really any organization to this because it shows how truly chaotic and horrible these attacks were. You can see in the image a woman reaching out to shield a small infant, and it kind of heightens the emotional impact of this print. It just shows how many innocent civilians and people who truly did nothing wrong were affected by these horrible, horrible bombings. I know that it was part of the U.S.'s World War II, trying to get Japan to surrender. But at the same time, when you look at these images, it's just tragic to see. It just shows the unimaginable suffering that happened to these people and is a great example of why warfare is not good for any of the world, no matter what it's over. We're going to move on to our next topic now. Okay, so in our second part, we're going to be talking about wartime in China. Specifically, the Nanking Massacre or the Rape of Nanjing. So a little backstory on the Nanking Massacre. It occurred during the Second Sino-Japanese War between 1937 and 1938, when the new Imperial Chinese Army captured the Chinese city of Nanking. Now, it is called Nanjing. During this, Japanese forces engaged in widespread atrocities. There was mass killings, rapes, looting, and torture of many Chinese civilians and disarmed military personnel. The exact number of casualties is still very unknown, but it's known that tens of thousands of Chinese people were killed during these rapes, and hundreds of thousands were tortured. Now we're going to look at some images that tell the stories of this horrible, horrible massacre and see how these stories unfolded. Our first photograph captures refugee huts at Tzi Sin Shan in March 1938. It's from the Jamboard Week 9, and it is unknown who took this picture. This photograph was captured at Tzi Sia Shan. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. And it was just outside of Nanking in March 1938. This image shows a camp of people who have been refugeeing outside of Nanking due to the massacres that were happening there. The image shows a makeshift settlement where people are living outside of the city so that they are not affected by the horrible things going on there. It shows how horrible it actually was. People had to resort to living in huts and shacks and terribly assembled houses just because their city was invaded by the Japanese. It was a horrible way of life, and these people completely did not deserve this. They were very innocent people, and mostly all civilians were living in these huts. Each hut was a humble abode and had one family living in it. Sometimes they were overcrowded and had even more than that, which was a terrible way of living for these people. They barely had any food, any resources, and had to survive on basically themselves. So, although this picture doesn't show the direct terrible events that happened in Nanking during 1938, it's connected to a dark period in history, and its importance goes way beyond just what happened in Nanking and the horrible atrocities that occurred. It freezes a moment in time, and it becomes a historical record of the things that these civilians had to do in order for their safety during this time. I think that the old style camera that's used in this image makes it look timeless and captures history in every part of the image. All the simple huts and the clothes racks that they have sitting there, it looks like kind of a pilgrim community or something out of the colonial times where people just set up a small makeshift community. And it's kind of absurd that it had to happen in the 20th century, especially in a country like China, where it has been very technologically advanced throughout history. It just shows how horrible of a time this was and how much of an effect this truly had on the civilians of China and Nanking at the time. So we're going to move on to our next image now. Our next image is actually a cartoon. It's called the Survivor Cartoon Illustration and is from our Japan wartime lecture in class. This image more explicitly depicts the atrocities that were committed during the Nanking Massacre and is an illustration of a true story that actually happened. So I'm going to give you a quote of the person who described this event and explain exactly what's happening in this photo. This quote goes along with the image and is a part of the Japan wartime lecture that we had in class. On the morning of December 13th, 1937, a team of Japanese soldiers broke into the rented house of Zia Shaquin's family. The house owner, along with Zia's father and grandparents, were slaughtered. The soldiers smashed Zia's 1-year-old sister onto the ground to death from the mother's arms. Her mother, 2 elder sisters, all were raped and butchered. Altogether, 7 members out of 9 of the family lost their lives, leaving then 8-year-old Zia and her 4-year-old younger sister survived. As you can tell, this quote describes the absolute horrendous atrocities that went on during the Nanking Massacre. It goes a lot more in depth than the last picture, which just showed the huts and what people resorted to during these times, but this is what was actually going on while Japan was invading Nanking. It's truly horrific, and the photo is just a horrible representation and horrible to look at. At the end of the day, the Nanking Massacre was one of the worst massacres and atrocities in world history. And these events should never happen again. It was a horrible time in China and East Asia as a whole, and we need to learn from this in the past. After all that is said and all those pictures are analyzed, I feel safe to say that wartime in Japan and China were very horrible for the people. But at the end of the day, they tell empowering stories and show how communities came together and people rallied to end horrible, horrible treatment of people like this. Thank you for listening, and I hope you have a great day.